Good morning. Good morning. Good to see you, those that I can see right here in Cleveland. Good to have you. Those who are joining us over in Dahlonega, really good to have you. Now, earlier this morning, earlier service, we had a power outage while I was there in Dahlonega preaching there, and it kind of lost here and all that kind of stuff. And so maybe we have some people who were watching earlier this morning from those locations, and you're trying to catch what you missed. Good to have you back online with us as well. We have started this series last week called Right in the Eye, and it kind of comes from this, Old Testament book of Judges. But, kind of before I jump in there, to bring us some context, do you realize that when you're a child, like the younger you are, the easier it is to figure out what is right and what is wrong, or what is good and what is bad, right? The younger you are, okay, because there's usually a grown-up in the room or somewhere nearby or will soon be back to let you know what is right, what is wrong, what is good, and what is bad. So it's really easy. We don't have to give much thought at all. I've got a little grandbaby. She starts to go reach something, and she hears me say, no. No. And she's like, oh, and then she'll start saying no, right? And so it's really easy when we're young. But I tell this, to middle schoolers, to kids that are growing up, to high schoolers, young adults as they're starting to launch out. Listen, as we get older, it gets harder and more complicated because it becomes like more nuanced. What is right, what is wrong, what is good, what is bad. And come on, adulting is not making like decisions between what is right and wrong. All right, that's childhood. Adulting, we're making decisions between what is good, better, and best, or what's bad and worse, right? And it all becomes so complicated. Again, because there's these little things that, you have to have all the facts, have to have all the, implications of, what's going to be the chain reaction of the decisions we make. But here's something else that happens. As we get older, as we start to grow out of childhood and into adulthood, somewhere in those early adolescent years, some wants and desires are awakened in us, right? This happens to adults as well whenever you see something on TV or somebody drives up in one and you didn't know you needed it until you saw it, right? A want and a desire just comes alive in us and it's awakened. And then not only that, our conscience is awakened or conditioned, whatever your philosophical viewpoint of that is, right? And so now you start to have this internal battle of the conscience, and you don't know if that's coming from all the outside voices conditioning you, or if it's some internal voice, or maybe the thumbprint of God himself that's in us, telling us and steering us between what is right and wrong. And so when you add all the wants and all the desires and all the appetites and then all the culture and what we see around us and what other people have, and you throw all of that into the mix, it becomes really hard and difficult to determine what exactly is right and wrong, what is good and what is bad. And so thankfully there are people like me in your life who can tell you what to do, right? I wish it was that easy, don't you? Right? But here's the thing that's also true about all of us. Eventually, we all knowingly do something wrong. I don't mean do something wrong because our parents told us it was wrong, though that happens. Yeah, they told us don't do that, and we did it anyway. I don't mean we do it and it's wrong because a coach, a teacher, or somebody else, or a boss told us it was wrong, or even because the government, a police officer, and society at large. I'm saying knowingly do something that is wrong to us. Like with our conscience and with our own kind of sense of, morality. We violate our own conscience. We violate our own convictions because we want something, right? Desire something, have strong feelings about something, and we knowingly do something wrong. Where does that come from? Why do we do that? And so it's so much easier if we could just go back. And I know there's times, because as I meet with people sometimes, they just say, just tell me what to do. And it's like we want to revert back to our childhood where there's some grown-up in the room to tell us what is right, what is wrong, what is good, what is bad, and what should we do. So what we're going to drill down on today is this question. Who rules and whose rules? Like, who rules? Who gets to be in charge? Whose rule do we submit ourselves to and come under? And by whose rules are we willing to abide and order our lives by? I mean, is it parents? Because we moved out of that, right? A lot of us in here, we moved away from the parents, right? Or maybe some other person, some other authority. It's the boss. It's the police officer, the probation officer. Maybe it's the government, right? The government dictates because there's laws, right? We got laws. And where do they come from? Well, they come from society because, in our country at least, society gets together and determines what's right and what's wrong, what's acceptable, what's not, what's good and what's bad. We vote on it, put somebody in place to police it, and there we go, off to the races. Or is it you? Is it like the person in the mirror is the one who determines what is right, what is wrong, what is good, what is bad, and what you're going to do? Because ultimately, and listen, even if you're somebody who's watching over in Southeast Asia, because we have people over there who will watch us from time to time, and so even if you're there in in a country that we can't even relate to, that is governed in such a way that you have very, very few freedoms, you still get to choose who rules ultimately in your decisions and by whose rules you're going to live by. Now, we started last week, and throughout this series, we're going to be looking at a period of Israel's history where they were kind of in their infancy, the infant stages of becoming a nation, right? It's called the period of the Judges. It's actually a book in the Old Testament called Judges, and it is between Moses, he's way over here on the timeline, Moses, who goes in, the great liberator, and gets the people of Israel out of Egyptian bondage, let my people go kind of thing. And he goes and gets them out of Egyptian bondage where they had been for many, many years. They went in as a small family, maybe an extended family, went in to escape a famine. They were well treated, taken care of, but eventually began to populate and overpopulate according to the Egyptians, right? And so Egypt turned on them, held them captive, and then eventually enslaved them. And Moses sets the people free, forms them into a nation, gives them the laws of God, the 10 Commandments, and then shows them and expounds on that, on how to apply it in all the situations that they were facing. But then Moses dies, and Joshua steps up to the leadership plate. And he's the one that takes them into the promised land, a place where they can settle and call home. And they've not had that, not as a nation, not as a people. And now they get to determine their own future. They get to make decisions. It's no longer submitting to the authority of an Egyptian pharaoh or taskmasters or slave masters. They now get to decide for themselves. And so this period of the Judges comes in the infancy of Israel, between Joshua taking them into the promised land and before they grow up and become a kingdom ruled under their first king, Saul. It's about 330 years or so. And again, between the promised land and the kingdom, they are a theocratic commonwealth. In other words, there's 12 tribes that are all taking up, land and territory. And they all kind of self-govern, but collectively together make up what we know as the nation of Israel. And they are governed by elders and tribal leaders who are supposed to consult God and consult the law of Moses, which they already have, right? And that's what they do. They hear from God, and then they dispense the law of Moses, and they teach all their people the law of Moses, and they apply that in all the different areas of their life. See, they didn't have a king because God was supposed to be their king. And they were going to be under his rule and his rules, right? That was how they were governed. But after after Joshua dies, now God has to raise up judges because the tribal leaders and the elders, they began to look to different standards, and the people themselves started to look to different standards because, hey, Joshua, daddy's gone. We're on our own. And they start determining how they're going to live now that they kind of moved out from underneath daddy. And so God raises up judges who then dispense the law, and judges who are supposed to call people back into a relationship with God under his rule and call people to live according to God's rules. But the thing is, Israel didn't listen to the judges. They just said, no, we don't want to do that. And so there's this phrase that appears a couple of times in the book of Judges. It really summarizes the whole book, and it's this. In those days, Israel had no king. Now, God was supposed to be the king, but they said, no, we don't want him to be our king. And they didn't elect a king, and God didn't appoint a king, so they had no king, so therefore everyone did what was right in his own eyes. Everyone got to call the shots. And so Judges gives us a snapshot of the moral decline, or at least the moral redirection, so to speak, right? Recalibration away from God and his rules and what he says. And now we're going to calibrate on something else, which is really what I want, what I decide, the direction I want to go. And it gets so bad that if you were here last week, you heard this. If you weren't, it's worth going back and watching and listening to, online. But it gets so bad that at the end of the book of Judges, which is where we went last week, it's a story that is just so unimaginably and so horrific. It's like a modern day horror movie. Everything goes bad. It's a story that involved exploitation, extramarital relationships, gang rape, murder, mutilation and dismemberment of bodies, an attempted genocide, just wiping out an entire group of people, kidnapping girls, little girls, and then forcing them into marriage to older men. And the story ends with no happy ending and no redemptive quality whatsoever. It just ends with this verse. Everybody did what was right in their own eyes. And everybody in that story, no matter how horrific their behavior was, could justify what they did in their own eyes. And so Judges gives us this snapshot of the moral decline, but it also gives us a snapshot of this 300-year cycle that just repeats itself generation after generation after generation. And this cycle still repeats itself. In fact, some of you, this is the summary of your life up until this point. It's disobedience, disaster, and deliverance. I disobeyed, whether it was mom and dad, whether it was teacher, whether it was coach, whether it was a boss, whether it was somebody, whether it was the government. I disobeyed. I now got myself in a pickle, and there's a disaster. I need someone to save me. I need somebody to help me, somebody to get me out, right? I disobeyed. Now there's a disaster. I need somebody to post bail. I've disobeyed. I have a disaster. I need a recovery program. Whatever it may be. I declare bankruptcy. I need to start over, right? I disobeyed. It ended in divorce. Now I'm trying to regroup. Whatever it may be. Now, you would say to go, I don't know about disobey. I mean, that's a strong word. That just sounds like, I was just such a rebel. Okay, let me soften it up. You end up in the same place. I deviated a little. You know, they said, don't date them, don't go out with them, don't hang out with them, don't be friends with them, don't do whatever and all that kind of stuff. And so I didn't totally disobey. I just kind of deviate just a little bit, right? I didn't do something criminal. I just deviated. Okay, so instead of disobey, you deviate, and then it becomes dysfunctional, right? Because that's how we describe it in families. So you won't say my family's a disaster. We just say it's a little bit of dysfunction, right? It just doesn't work the way it's supposed to. I deviated in the way I approached dating, right? I deviated in the way that I approached, my sexual behavior. And then we ended up getting together, and it's a dysfunctional relationship. You end up in the same place. I need somebody to help us out. Right? I need somebody to help fix this. And this is not where it started with Israel. It's not where it starts with us. Where it started with Israel was with devotion. I mean, they were sincerely committed to God. But that sincere commitment eventually was forsaken or forgotten due to compromise. Just a little deviation that led to some dysfunction, right? And then out and out disobedience that led to a disaster. And either way, they were stuck. And so God would raise up judges to kind of keep them from going over the edge or being utterly wiped out. And they would just repeat it again. They would just go through it again. Now, listen, if you're like me, I grew up in church. And so from a young kid, I remember at 6 years old starting out in devotion, because everything I knew of God at 6 years old and everything I knew about a little 6-year-old me, I made commitments to God that were sincere as a 6-year-old commitment can ever be. I confessed all my 6-year-old sins, and asked God to come and forgive me and set me free and all that. And I just devoted myself at 6 years old that I was going to follow Jesus. And I went and I did the whole deal, got baptized, got dunked, and grew up in church and youth group. At some point, I kind of deviated from that. I kind of got distracted from that. I ended up in a disaster, and then I have to come back. And I don't know whether you believe once saved, always saved, or you can lose your salvation. All I can tell you is I repeated the cycle over and over and over and over and over again, all the way into adulthood. And probably there are some times where I'm still wrestling with the deviation, experiencing the dysfunction, and saying, oh, God, come help me. So I'm not here to talk about our theology of once saved, always saved, or hey, it's eternal security. Here's what I'm asking you. Where are you in the cycle? Right? Is it in the middle of disaster, needing deliverance, whatever, or is it full devotion? Because I started out with devotion. Listen, some of you in your marriage, right? You started out with devotion. You started out so devoted, but then got distracted and then deviated. Now it's dysfunctional, right? You knew how family and marriage was supposed to be, and somewhere you left that course, and there was something that drew you off. There was something that caught your attention. There was something or someone that caused you to look to another. walk with another, spend too much time with another. Or maybe you just started looking around at the world, the culture, and you're like, okay, I'm not like disobeyed and done anything, but I just want something different. I just want something different, right? Maybe some of you didn't grow up in a Christian home, or you didn't grow up, going to church like that and having those kind of commitments. Maybe you grew up in a totally dysfunctional home, right? And you grew up under alcoholic, abusive parents of some sort, and you escaped that. Or you were in a terrible, terrible marriage, right? And you got out of that. Or you found yourself in addiction, and you got help with that. And here's the thing. You said, I am finally free, and I'm never going back. But something drew you back. Maybe not back to the bad marriage, but back to the same behaviors that led to that bad marriage. The same way of thinking, right? The same criteria for how you pick who you date and where you're picking them from. Right? Something drew you back. You said, man, I finally got free of all of that debt, whether it was bankruptcy or you paid your way out, and I'm never going back. But now here you are, credit cards are maxed out again. And it's like, how did I get here again? So whether grew up in church and you're singing the I've decided to follow Jesus, no turning back, we turn back. Or whether you never had that experience and you're like, I'm finally free and never going back, we tend to go back. And maybe if you started out great and you just feel the tug to deviate from that original devotion. That is where Israel was when they started out. See, in order to understand what happens in Judges, you gotta go back and look at the book before that, Joshua. The account of when Joshua was in charge. And it's at the end of the book of Joshua, is when Joshua is nearing kind of the end of his life, the end of his leadership. He's got all the people in Israel, right? They're all now in the promised land. He's divided up the land. Everybody's building their cities and building their homes and building their whatever. And they're all working together. And he assembles them all together, kind of gives some final instructions of saying, guys, let me just give you this charge, okay? Because my days are limited and my time, it's about over. And so and it's kind of like the parents or the grandparents, the parents grabbing the kids and say, look, before you move out, right? Before you get the keys and before you pack up the boxes and before you move out, let's have a conversation. And it's in Joshua 24. Here's what he says. Now fear the Lord and serve him with all faithfulness. All right, be devoted to him. Be faithful to him. Throw away the gods of your ancestors, the ones that they worship beyond the Euphrates. Now, the Euphrates is a river that goes there through the Middle East. And what he's talking about is, this is way back before Egypt. Your ancestors before the Euphrates, we're talking about like Abraham, father of the faith, way before Moses. Like the one who started this out, when he came from this group of people, worshipped all types of pagan gods and forces they didn't understand and nature and all kinds of other stuff. He said, listen, let's throw away the ones that our ancestors worshiped, not all the way back there and in Egypt. Like that would have been your parents and your grandparents who were in Egypt, and they just picked up the culture and the ways and the influences of the Egyptians, and the Egyptians explained, how creation happened through a bunch of different gods, and they explained how, life was supposed to be according to all their gods. He said, look, throw that away. Because God's done shown up on the scene. He's revealed himself to you. Throw that away. You be faithful to, not just God's, the Lord, Jehovah. This one God, the true God, the creator God, who has been working on your behalf to get you here. Right? Serve the Lord. Now he says, I want you to be faithful. Right? And if you look at this Hebrew word, it's like the truthful. I want you to be truthful, which sounds weird, like you'll be truthful and faithful. He's like, I want you to be so trusting of God, so devoted of God. And you know what the truest test of faithfulness and trust is? Obedience. Like you sit there and say, oh, I trust you, well then obey me. Why? I don't want to do what you say. Why? Because I don't know if it'll work out. Oh, you don't trust me. I mean, that's the argument, right? So if you're really going to be faithful, you're really going to be trusting, you're really going to be truthful, it's going to show up in your willingness to obey. Not because you're forced to, but because you're devoted to. Right? And come on, parents, you've seen this. And it's not whenever your kids obey like one time. There needs to be a pattern of obedience. There needs to be like consistency in trust and obedience. And under Joshua, when they're coming into the promised land, God establishes a pattern of obedience. And here's what he says, like one of the cities that they have to fight, Jericho. You may have heard this story, Jericho and the mighty walls that you can't penetrate. And so what was God's battle plan? I want you to walk around the city 7 times, like 1 time every day and all that. And then on the last day, I want you to walk around it 7 times. And you're like, this is stupid. I'm walking around a city once a day and then 7 times on the last day. Oh yeah, and then what do? We fight. No, I want you to shout. And you're like, this is stupid. Why? Somebody come up with a better plan. This is stupid. And you say, God, what are you doing? It's kind of like Mr. Miyagi and the Karate Kid, wax on, wax off. And it's like, this doesn't make sense. Oh, it will. What he's trying to tell you is, I need to know that you will consistently obey me, not just one time when you're in trouble. But there needs to be a pattern of consistently obeying. But it's like the kids who never clean up the room. Right? You clamp down on them. They can't do anything. Finally, one day they show up and said, I made my bed. Can I go now? And you're like, no. Well, I made my bed. You need to do it consistently, and then we'll talk. Right? And Joshua was saying, look, I want you to be faithful and consistent with your devotion. And then get rid of the things and get rid of the thinking that fooled and failed our ancestors, that controlled them and held them captive. These little gods, it's just not stuff you attribute things to. They control you. You have to determine what is right or wrong based on what you think that little god would say or what that little god might be doing. And they're the ones who are dictating the direction of your life and the values of your life. He said, get rid of the little things, the little gods that you listen to, your ancestors listened to, that fooled you, that have failed you, that now control you. And they controlled the people that went before you. And it's controlling the people who are around you. And then he goes on, he says, but if serving the Lord seems undesirable to you, and at some point it will, that's my little caveat, at some point, doing what he wants me to do is not going to sit well with me. Then choose for yourself whom you will serve. You choose. You choose whether the gods of your ancestors, the ones that way back they served on the other side of the Euphrates, or the gods of the Amorites, the people who are around us right now, who are kind of dominating the area that we're living in whose land you're living. But as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. And here we have the first time in ancient record, a parent telling his children, as long as you live in my house and under my roof. Right? It's right here. Because he says, as far as me and mine, if you in my house and under my roof, we serve in the Lord. That's what he says, right? But it throws up the word, this group, the Amorites. I looked it up to see who the Amorites were, and the Amorites are they're some awful people, some terrible people. And he says, you get to choose. You can choose from the cultural influences around you. You can choose from your ancestors and your great-granddaddies and how the people used to do it before you. Or you can follow me and choose the Lord who's been with us through this journey. What Josh is trying to tell all of us is we all get to choose who ultimately rules and whose rules will follow. You get to choose. All of us. I don't care if you believe in predestination and predetermination and all that kind of stuff. At some point, the choice is given to you, and you get to choose who rules and by whose rules will I live by. Somebody said, well, then I choose me. I'm going to rule, and I'm going to live by my rules. But the people of Israel weren't quick to go there, and the reason being is because they knew the story. Moses had told them. It had been recorded, and so they knew about Adam and Eve, like the very first couple. And they knew that's the choice they made. That they just said, okay, wait a second. I choose to rule, and I choose to live by my rules. And so they disobeyed God, right? And they ate the forbidden fruit. Why? Because it looked good to them. It would give them what they wanted. And once they have the wisdom and can think and know like God, see like God, they don't need God. They can rule themselves, and then they can determine their own rules. And isn't that how we all got into this mess? Right? So that was the ancestors on the other side of the Euphrates. And then there's the Amorites. And those Amorites, the ones who were controlling the area, I looked them up to kind of see some of the history there. And this is outside the Bible. So if you're one of those who says, I don't believe in the Bible, it's a bunch of made-up history. Okay, let's just look at somebody outside the Bible, some other ancient groups who would write about one another. And in some of their writings, the Sumerians, they wrote about the Amorites, and they said that they are known for their brutality and their immorality, and they are awful people. They described them in one of the writings, they just said that they are disobedient to their own gods. They wouldn't even listen to their own deities. They were disloyal to one another. They relied on their weapons to get whatever they wanted. And listen, there was no right or wrong. It's whatever they wanted was right, and whatever they could pull off, they would do. One of them summed it up this way. They refused to bow their knee to anything or anyone except themselves, including if that meant infighting among the Amorites. So they were the most deplorable people because they had no moral compass other than themselves. And Josh is saying, you get to choose. You can do it the way your ancestors did, look where it got them. Or you can do it the way the people around you are doing it, look where it's getting them. You see, we're all fighting here in our country with the American dream, and the American dream is this. I want the freedom to do what I want, when I want, with whom I want. Right? And we enshrine that freedom in a constitution that says we all have the freedom to do what we want, when we want, with who we want. And there's, of course, the little footnotes there, little fine print that says, as long as it doesn't hurt anybody. But we all know, talked about last week, eventually it hurts somebody. It hurts you, hurts people who care about you, hurts the people around you, hurts the people who are coming up after you. The next generation, right? Some of you sit with your counselor or need to because your life is so messed up, not because of what you did, but because of what somebody else did. And you know what they did? Mom and dad, whoever it was, they did what they wanted, when they wanted, with whom they wanted, and you were just collateral damage, right? And so it hurts someone eventually. But here's the thing, we do what we want, with whom we want, and nobody can tell us it's wrong. See, that's the American dream, isn't it? So the Israelites, they respond to Joshua in his little fatherly talk. The people answered, far be it from us to forsake the Lord and serve other gods. We would never, I can't imagine turning away from God. They were so committed. They go on, they said, it was the Lord, our God himself, who brought our parents out of Egypt, from that land of slavery, and performed all those great signs and miracles and stuff before our eyes. They go on and says, yeah, just like you, Josh, we too will serve the Lord because he is our God. But Joshua doesn't just let it rest. He goes on and taunts them a little bit. He goes, really? I don't think so. I'm not sure you guys are going to do this based on our experience in the wilderness when I was a younger man. Because we made all kind of promises in Egypt when we was praying. And then we got out there in the wilderness, and we were turning left and right and deviating all over the place, and it was disaster after disaster after disaster. So I'm telling you, you got to choose who you're going to serve. We're going to serve the Lord. I just don't think you will. No, Josh, we're determined. Okay, there's going to come a point where it's going to be undesirable. And he's going to ask something from you or expect something from you that you're not going to like. That's not going to sit well and it's not going to make sense. What are you going to do? Because you get to choose who rules and by whose rules you'll live by. No. We're committed. And for a while, they were. For a while. Until Joshua died and all the elders who was of that generation died as well. Let me give it to you this way, okay? A little bit of a college town here, okay? Back to school time. It's like Josh has pulled up with the kids and he's got them all moved into the dormitory. He's got them all set up. They've got their schedule, their classes, their books, and they know what's going to happen. And on his way out the door, he says, now listen, this is all up to you. You get to choose. Stay faithful to God. But when what God asks you to do is undesirable, you get to choose. You get to choose to do it the way all these other people have gone to college and done and all that kind of stuff, and you know what they paid. Or you can do like all the morons around you and what they're doing and how they're going to pay. But at the end of the day, you get to choose. And you're going, oh, no, thank you, Mom and Daddy. Y'all are so good and all that kind of stuff. I'm going to make you proud. I'm going to follow God. And then they leave, right? And some of you have flashbacks to your college days. I was reading an article this week about college students and parents with college kids and all that. And it says, college students, listen, it says, the decisions made within the first 4 weeks on campus will set the course for your college career. First 4 weeks. Here's what it will do, I can tell you. It will reveal your values, and it will also reveal moral authority. Who's got it? Where do you find it? Right? Because I can tell you, while I went to a Christian school and ended up graduating from one, I went to 2 non-Christian schools ahead of time, and those first 4 weeks was not about getting to class on time and doing your homework. This first week especially was about the frats and the sororities, and there was enough free-flowing alcohol and all kinds of stuff going on. It was scamming every person. It was like you're either looking to hook up with somebody or looking to who you're going to hook up somewhere in the semester, and it's all of that. It wasn't the, oh my gosh, Mom and Daddy are gone. Where's the Bible study meeting? Nobody was asking that. It wasn't the what church am I going to get involved in? What small group do I need to get? Where's my faith family? It wasn't that at all. It was everything else. And so Josh has got them in. He's got them settled. Their bags are unpacked. And he says, I'm about to leave and pull off. Follow God. Be faithful. Now, it's not just college kids. Can I tell you, it's also when families move to other cities. I think the decision you make within the first 4 weeks of relocating are very telling. And this isn't a slap at anybody, but I can't tell you how many people I meet who, when they're coming to church and it's like, oh, first time, yeah, and it's like, oh, great, so are you new to the area? No, we've been living here for about 3 or 4 years. Oh, okay, did y'all attend church somewhere else? No, we don't usually go to church. We just finally been here 3 or 4 years, finally figured out it's probably time to find a family of faith and get some trajectory going on our spiritual side. I'm like, oh, I bet it didn't take you 3 or 4 years to figure out the rest of your social calendar. I bet it didn't take you 3 or 4 years to figure out the rest of your connections. If you got kids, I guarantee it didn't take you 3 or 4 years to figure out which sports to involve them in, which club to involve them in, which social things to get involved, and all that kind of stuff. And it's just like we moved in and we settled, but within the first few weeks or year, that just wasn't a priority. And then something happens. We need help. You see, it goes on that now Judges, the book of Judges picks up the story and says, after that whole generation, meaning Joshua, had been gathered to their fathers, another generation grew up that did not know the Lord or the works that he had done for Israel. Come on, I know I'm preaching to the choir because you're in the building, either here at Dahlonega, or you're watching online and you're connected. But I'm just telling you, some of you are starting to, you feel this, you sense this. You crawled back in because you stayed out of church long enough as an adult. Your kids have no interest in it whatsoever. And you're trying to give them some type of moral, parameters before they launch off into adulthood. And guess what? They're not interested in looking for those moral parameters at the church, in the scriptures, or to the heavens. They're looking to themselves and to others around them. Just like Israel. It goes on, it says, they forsook the Lord. They forgot him. The commitment went away. The God of their fathers, who had brought them out of the land of Egypt. And he had gotten them out of a mess. But they didn't know that. And then they followed after various gods, powers and forces that seemed so overwhelming and so great and so supernatural and so, unexplainable. And so there's got to be something to attribute what's going on, right? And so they followed various gods of the peoples around them. Now, they retained a belief in God. Throughout Judges, they're still praying and calling on God and doing some religious stuff here and there, but they utterly rejected his authority. We're not going to live under his rules. We don't want to live like that. Instead, they were influenced by various gods and by the people around them. And it says, they forsook the Lord who had brought them out of Egypt. You see, they didn't know why their parents were the way they were. There's many of you would say, my parents had such strong religious moral convictions, and they were just so, and it was overbearing and all that, and I couldn't wait to get out of there and get rid of all that. But you never paused to ask why they were that way. And if you did, they might not have given a good answer that made sense because, he's God and all that. Maybe they didn't want to be honest with you. Maybe they didn't want to, they just felt embarrassed. They felt like maybe they'd lose some type of authority in your life or respect by you. But listen, some of you parents need to be honest with your kids and say, you know why I'm so devoted to God? Because I was a wreck. I was an addict because I had all kinds of addictions. I had all kinds of stuff because I was unfaithful to my marital vows. There was so much stuff. It is why I have tried now as best I can to keep my devotion to God front and center because of what he brought me out of. Maybe you parents need to talk about, the family of origin that you escaped. And you can say, he is so important to me because of what he brought me out of. But they didn't hear those stories, or they didn't catch those stories, or it didn't land with them or settle with them. And so they just said, these are goofy behaviors and weird religious practice. We don't have to do all of this. Let me give it to you this way, because I've heard this story more than once of somebody who escapes an alcoholic, abusive parent in a home that is so dysfunctional because of them. And they finally get old enough and they get married or whatever it is, or they go to college or military and they move out and they get away from the alcoholic, abusive parent and all the dysfunctional family. And they're doing good, right? Because they're out now and they're married and they have their kids. And if it's not their kids, maybe the grandkids start to use alcohol recreationally, socially, and maybe abuse it. And the person who's drinking says, well, there's nothing wrong with it. And they're not. I'm not going to be the pastor stand up here and say, the Bible says it's all a sin, because it doesn't. And it's okay. But you can't understand why your parents or your grandparents freak out over every little thing you drink. You might not have any idea of the Egypt they got rescued from. And here you're dabbling in the very God that held them captive. And so you need to ask yourself, why are there convictions like that? Why are they so stringent on that? Why do they go over the top on some of these things? And listen, if it's not that, abuse of alcohol or drugs, maybe it's poverty. It's why somebody is so frugal and why they're saving and why they want to, or maybe because they escaped poverty and God led them out. Maybe it's like, why are they so extreme about their interactions with the opposite sex? And why do they have like goofy rules like I have, where I won't travel in a vehicle with another woman that's not my wife, just the two of us? I'm not going to do that. Why? Because you don't know the Egypt that we were brought out of. And so maybe it was poverty, or maybe it was infidelity, or maybe it was workaholism, or maybe it was materialism. It's like, why are you so generous? Why do you give? Why are you giving so much to the church? I mean, that's just crazy. All they want is your money. It's like, it has nothing to do with them. It has me being set free from materialism and greed and discontentment. And this is how God broke me free of that, and I'm going to continue to do it because it's his rules. Goes on, it says, the anger of the Lord burned against Israel, and he delivered them into the hands of those who plundered them. It's like you want to hang with them and you want to be like them, I will just hand you over to them. But they're going to take from you. And that is the thing about our society and our culture. We love building people up and tearing them down, and society loves the ride both ways. Goes on, it says, he sold them into the hands of their enemies all around, whom they were no longer able to resist. And they were distressed. We used to be able to resist them, but now we can't. I used to have options, now I don't. See, let me summarize this whole little passage for you. They forsook God, and then they followed the little gods, their emotions and their appetites. Oh, and the people around them, because that's what the people around them followed too. And then they forfeited their freedom. Right? Now here's the thing. If you reject God's rule, you will eventually be ruled by your emotions and your appetites or the culture. Now you can push against that, and you can try to prove me wrong, but you come back in a few years and dang it if you didn't prove me right. Because that is the truth of God's word, and that's the truth of humanity and how we live, right? You see, if you refuse to submit to God's rules, then like becomes right. Whatever I like and whatever I want and whatever's good for me. Might becomes right. And I don't mean just the rich and the powerful who can like force other people. No. Might, here's what I mean by that. Whatever I can get away with or whatever I can afford. Because some of you have made decisions and go, that's going to cost you. And you go, yeah, but I can afford it. I can afford it. That's going to be, regret. Yeah, but that's okay. I'll pay it. I'm good. Like and might become right. And eventually, heard about this last week, but it's true. Listen, eventually, you do what you once were convinced was wrong, and you become someone you did not think you would ever become, and you do things you think or you thought you were incapable of doing. I have so many people when I say, how did you get here? And it's like, I don't know. I can't make sense of it. I never thought that I would be one of those people who. I never thought that I could. I never thought that I would, and now I have. And I don't know how to get back. You see, all the influences around you, all the influences within you, it's like, I don't want to deny my emotions. Come on. In our American culture nowadays, we have these phrases that just makes it like a value and a virtue. You know, be true to you. What does that mean? I mean, you feel it? You want it? Be true to you. Or how about this one? Follow your heart. That advice is only as good as your heart. And I don't know about your heart, but I'll be honest about mine. Mine's deceived me more than once. Right? But we enshrine that as if it's some kind of virtue and some truth to be upheld. And the thing is, like, just follow your heart. And I'm like, do not follow your heart. Okay? Emotions aren't bad. I mean, they're the seasoning of life, but sometimes they will lead you astray. I mean, it is the seasoning of life. It's not the main meal. Try to make a meal out of nothing but seasoning. It's awful, isn't it? So it's like, I don't want to deny my feelings. Well, I'm not going to deny my feelings. Now I can't. They control me. I don't want to deny my appetites. I won't deny my desires and my appetites. Now I can't. They control me. I don't want to resist the culture and the people and the influences around me. I won't resist and put distance between me and my friends. Now I can't. They control me. I don't want to stop drinking. I don't want to stop sleeping around. I don't want to stop spending. I won't stop doing it. Now I can't stop doing it. Now, I know there's going to be some pushback because some people are going to go, whoa, whoa, whoa. It's not all about emotions, and it's not all about appetites, and it's not all about the people around me. I follow reason. And that sounds so smart. Until you realize how many lives have been ruined by people doing things they thought were reasonable. You see, we can lie to ourselves and we can rationalize. And when we were making the decisions, it sounded so reasonable, so logical, until it blew up on us. You see, here's what I'm telling you. When you reject God's authority, you will eventually find yourself under a less caring, less merciful, and less forgiving authority. You. Because I cannot tell you how many times, I've dealt with it myself, but I can't tell you how many times I've met with people who have said, I know that God forgives me, but I can't forgive myself. A less caring, less merciful, less forgiving authority. Right? If it's not that, you'll find yourself under the authority of an addiction that has no mercy and does not care. If it's not that, it'll be under the control of a group of people. Right? So here's the thing. What are those little gods? Well, I've already told you, it's our emotions. And if you reject God's authority and you just give in to your emotions, you will be controlled by your fear, your insecurity, your anger, your envy, your guilt, or even your loneliness. Listen, you'll be controlled by your appetites, your lust, your greed, materialism of wanting more and wanting better and wanting bigger, of just the substance that can somehow alter your mood and your outlook and your thinking, or even hedonism, just the pleasure of everything. If it's not going to be your emotions or your appetites, you will be ruled by the merciless, unforgiving, unrelenting culture. And you'll find yourself being controlled by comparing yourself to other people, right? Competing against other people, fighting for recognition, for acceptance, for affirmation from other people. And if it's not those, let me throw this one in there. The unrelenting, uncaring, unmerciful, and unforgiving family history. Of your family history. and the way that you were raised and what you were brought and conditioned and everything else. And here's the thing. Some of you, whenever you got out of your family's house, whenever you got away from mom and dad or whatever the situation was, right? And you said, I am determined and devoted. I will be nothing like them. Your attempt to be nothing like them is what controls you. You don't know what you want to be like. You just don't want to be like them. But you didn't come under God's rule, and you didn't come under His rules. You're just breaking free from theirs. And how many of us, determined not to be like our parents, are becoming more and more like our parents? Oh, that's an oh me, not an amen, but I get it. But it's true, isn't it? And our family history starts to control us. It goes on. The anger of the Lord burned against Israel, so that He sold them into the hands of this guy with a really hard name I'm not going to pronounce because it's too many letters, from Aram Naharaim, to whom the Israelites were subject for 8 years. Now, the reason I throw this guy's name up there is because we think he was a Cushite, because that cushion right there, so that tells us a little bit about the warring people he was from. But this right here, do you know what this translates out to be? You know, because names have meaning. We just did a whole series on names. Do you know what this means? It means twice evil, or double the evil. In other words, if you think serving God becomes undesirable, there's something that's unimaginable. And some of us have found that out the hard way. That something God wanted us to do was undesirable. So we opted to serve someone or something else, and it has become unimaginable. The horror, the pain, the regret, the isolation, the loss. You see, the ones that they copied eventually conquered them and then controlled them. We were made to be ruled, not controlled. Ruled. In other words, God created us. We're not the creators. We're the creation. God created us. And then He gave us the freedom to choose, to walk it, back and forth, in and out of relationship with Him. We can do that and say, listen, but He wants to rule us, not control us. By the way, it's a little interesting right here. This guy, the double evil, the whatever, and all that kind of stuff, 8 years. Maybe it's just ironic. I'm sure it is. But that's the maximum term of a president in the United States. So maybe when we look at the landscape and go, what's the deal with God? Maybe He's just sold us over to the one who reflects us. Maybe. Maybe it's why sometimes as Christians we don't feel like we have a really good option in choosing our leader, because we have already decided we don't want to be under God's rule and live by His rules. Maybe. Here's the thing. When you lean to these other gods, it is always easier to say no to the merciful, forgiving, caring, loving God than it is these unmerciful, unforgiving, uncaring little gods. Always easier to say no to God than it is my appetites, my emotions, or even my social circle, isn't it? But here's the good news. I know this is depressing, but here's the good news. Next verse. But when they cried out to the Lord, He raised up for them a deliverer. It doesn't mean when they repented and they said they were sorry and they did everything wrong. No. When they just got miserable and they cried out to the Lord, because they still believed in God. And this doesn't I don't think this is giving us the implication that, oh, we were wrong, you were right. I don't think it's that at all. I think it's the, Mom, I am so miserable. Dad, I am so miserable. I am so angry. I am so distressed. I am so stuck. They can look at you and go, well, I can tell you where you went wrong. But that's not what God did. God just sends them a deliverer. Because He loves them so much that even before we repent and say we're sorry, He's willing to intervene. That's the beauty of the story of Jesus, that while we were yet sinners, He came and died for us. That He showed up and died for us. Not because we were sorry, not because we were apologetic, not because we were repentant, not because we wanted to undo anything and say, you're right. He just saw we were miserable. And He came to us. You see, ultimate freedom is found under the authority of King Jesus. And if he's not king, he's just Jesus. And the world is pretty impressed with Jesus. They just don't submit to him. He's inspiring. They just won't follow him. You see, they rejected and killed Jesus for calling himself a king. Because those who were in power with that title saw king as a totally different thing. In other words, we're in control. We're not going to give him control. And he's like, I didn't come to take control. No. I came to set you free. You see, in the Gospel of John, when Jesus is standing before Pilate and he's on trial and facing his execution, Pilate says, they're calling you a king. They say that you're a king. In fact, that's why they brought these charges, because you're a threat to the Roman Empire and Caesar if you're a king. You're definitely a threat to the Jewish Empire if you're supposed to be their king. And they don't want you as their king, and we don't need you as our king. Are you a king? And Jesus responds, you've called me a king. You're right. For this reason I was born and I came into the world. But then he says, not to take control. I came to reveal the truth. Truth about God, truth about you, truth about life and the world, the truth about what's right, what's wrong, what's up, what's down, what's good, and what's bad. And anybody who's really looking for the truth is going to come and follow me. He didn't say I'm here to control. You see, he's a king like no other because he's not here to take control. He's here to give freedom. In fact, when he started out his ministry, he's in the synagogue, he opens the scrolls, he reads the Old Testament prophet, and he says, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, and he has anointed me to give you good news. And what is that good news? To proclaim liberty for the captive, freedom for the oppressed. He rolls it up and he says, today, that's being fulfilled. That's being fulfilled. Why? Because I'm a king. And I'm not a king to come take control. I'm a king who wants to give you freedom. You choose who rules and by whose rules you live by. But because Jesus knows the power of these little guys, he knows the power of your emotions, he knows the power of your appetites, he knows the power of the culture and the influences around us, because he knows how powerful they are, he requires unconditional surrender to him. This morning, in Dahlonega, in our early service, we had a baptism. And that baptism is symbolic of surrendering ourselves fully to Jesus, of dying to ourselves, being raised to life. Listen, that baptism is a demonstration of placing our hands fully into his and immersing ourselves in the claims and the teachings and the instructions and everything about Jesus. And when we come out, it's like the old is gone, the new is there, and we begin, listen, not being controlled, but being committed to living under his rule and according to his rules. That's what it is. That's what it is. You see, way after Judges, Israel starts to adopt this practice of baptism. It was long before Christianity. And it was an outward demonstration of an inward condition to live under the rule and according to the rules of our Heavenly Father. And so as you bow your head and close your eyes, are you distressed? Are you distressed? And maybe you've had some kind of faith in Jesus, and maybe you've made some kind of commitment to Jesus, just like Israel did. But the truth is you've deviated and you're in the middle of a disaster or very dysfunctional something, and you're just like, I don't even know how to crawl out of this and where to start. I can tell you where it starts. He sent a deliverer. Surrender to his rule and his rules. And even when it seems undesirable what he's asking you to do and what you feel like he is kind of prompting you to do, maybe what he has clearly instructed and has been recorded, when it feels undesirable, you choose to trust him. And you choose to do what he's asking you to do. Not because he seized control, but because that is the steps to your freedom. Heavenly Father, help us, free us, forgive us, set us right. Lord God, would you come and rule? We're handing you the keys. We're surrendering. We're all in. You are right. We are so wrong. There is no one that we would rather follow. You are our heart's desire. And so, Heavenly Father, fix us as you forgive.